What up, everyone? This is Mr. Lord, Dark Professor, Dark Joker, and this is an edition of How to Save a Dead Franchise. The franchise we're going over this time is Star Wars, the poster child of a dead franchise. For stars, let's go over to what happened first. So, October 30th, 2012, Disney bought Lucasfilm from George Lucas for around $4 billion. Uh, Co-chairman of Lucasfilm at the time, Kathleen Kennedy, became the president of Lucasfilm, and the sequel trilogy was announced. Now, as Disney started running things, the Expand Universe, which was a great thing Star Wars had, it continued on for 2 years. We had Clone Wars Season 6, which 1 through 5 were on Cartoon Network. Since Disney bought it, they went Warner Brothers airing it, so they put it on Netflix. So Season 6 premiered on Netflix March 7th, 2014. And And while all this was going on, Disney had the outlines for George Lucas's sequel trilogy and for Underworld, which was a mobster show that he had made, but couldn't develop due to the pricing of it. Now, let's get into how Star Wars died. The first red flags were in April 3rd, 2013. LucasArts, which was the video game division at Lucasfilm, was shut down because Disney historically doesn't care a lot about video games. That's why Square Enix does all the work for Kingdom Hearts. And in April 25th, 2014, Disney announced that the Expanded Universe was done and was rebranded as Legends. It was declared non-canon. That pissed off a lot of people, and history will say this is when Star Wars died and Disney Star Wars was born. And so a new Disney Star Wars continuity was then started to be made by the story group, which included, Pablo Hidalgo, Dave Filoni, Kathleen Kennedy, a bunch of other people, a lot of producers and directors they hired. Now let's start with some of the stuff. So first off, Rebels. This had 4 seasons, 15 episodes, 22 episodes, 16 episodes. This was well received. It was a decent show. You know, downgrading animation from Clone Wars, but still, it was, as far as Disney Star Wars is concerned, this had some of the better writing. And you had a total of 75 episodes. The budget for each episode was on average of $1 million. So Pyre Show cost approximately $75 million. Battlefront 2015. So this was like the first major video game that Disney did for Star Wars. So it released, and there was not a lot of content, especially there wasn't a campaign, no galactic conquest, no instant action. So it pissed a lot of people off, which is something EA developed a reputation for doing. This was a AAA game, so I said for a minimum, it was probably at minimum $200 million budget. Episode 7, Force Awakens, or as a better name for it now would be Star Wars Fool's Gold. So it released December 18, 2015. Basically, it had a lot of initial praise, but looking back, a lot of people, myself included, hate this thing now for what all came after it. So Disney discarded the sequel trilogy story treatments, even though Lucas thought they were going to use them. Obviously, that didn't happen. So here's some problems. Rey was overpowered with no explanation, and that made her a Mary Sue. And even though they could have used something, I don't know, like Force Psychosis, which is something from Fate of the Jedi, that could have explained her powers. Then Han Solo unceremoniously killed off by Kylo Ren, who was a ripoff of Jason Solo, aka Darth Kaitis. And Leia didn't even acknowledge Chewbacca after Han died. So when they all returned to the base, she acknowledged Rey, who she had never met before. Made no sense whatsoever. was described as having fled and basically deserted the New Republic when the Jedi Order was destroyed by Kylo Ren and Snoke. And New Republic was unceremoniously killed off. Like Ozzy Prime was destroyed, and they never really established the New Republic. They established why them, the First Republic, and Resistance were all important. And yeah, so it was like, why should we care that they blew up a planet? Like, we never saw Alderaan in New Hope, but we still cared when Alderaan blew up because of how the writing was. And so, as I said, they made Kylo Ren rip off Jason Solo. They also made Finn a ripoff of Kyle Katarn. And after all the tax breaks, it had net for a production budget of 447 million. I don't know if the tax breaks and all that were including the 12 billion. I'm assuming not, with the numbers I'm going with right now. And there's a reason I'm listing budgets. Rogue One, released in 2016. As far as the movies go, this is the best Disney Star Wars movie. I think most people agree with that. This had a lot of reshoots and problems, and its budget was reported to be $265 billion. Yeah. Battlefront 2017. I refuse to call this Battlefront 2. This had a bad reception due to the campaign sucked. There was all these loot boxes, and like with the last one, there was no Galactic Conquest or instant action. Now, EA made updates to fix some of the problems, but a lot of people had left by then because they didn't make a good game at launch, which is something all developers need to do. Make a good game at launch. You'll make so much freaking money. Like, it's really dumb how these developers think, especially the Western ones. Anyway, this is a AAA game, so its budget is probably at least $200 million. Now, that's before the updates, of course. Episode 8, The Last Jedi, released December 15th, 2017. Basically, this, like if you want to talk about the health of Star Wars, this cut it to half. Like, it did more damage than anything. It made Luke look like a pussy because he wanted just to end the Jedi, and then they just had him sit somewhere, project his consciousness to whatever that planet's name was. That's the red salt planet. And then he just faded away. He just did nothing. Sat there, did nothing. Rey was confirmed to be a Mary Sue. Leia just went all Mary Poppins and floated herself into a Star Cruiser, not even bothering to save anyone else, and somehow able to breathe. But yeah, so many problems with that. Then the Holdo maneuver, you had all the hyperspace, like all the problems, like hyperspace is not something you mess with. The Holdo maneuver had so many problems with it. Like, there's a reason you have hyperspace routes. Because of stuff like this. And there's reasons people don't do it. There's a reason Star Wars does not deal with that. And yet, Kylo said, "Let the past die, killed you have to." And that basically was symbolic of what Kathleen Kennedy, Ryan Johnson, Jar Jar Abrams on what all these people wanted to do to Star Wars. They have Rose Tico saying it's not about killing those we hate, it's about saving those you love. Like, you're in a war. Your franchise is called Star Wars. People die in war. It sucks. It really sucks. But you're a soldier in a war. You should understand that. Then you have the Canto Bight stuff. It's all about, oh, the rich people selling both sides. Yeah, that unfortunately that bull crap happens in war. But don't frame it like basically it's just meant to, it was all meant to promote wokeness and how Rose freed a bunch of random animals. It's like she didn't even bother with some of the other stuff there. Then Snoke was killing off with the build up of him as a threat. I mean, people complain about Boba Fett and Darth Maul getting killed off early, and there's but they were built up. They were built. Snoke was not built up at all. It was like, oh yeah, this guy's Snoke. let's get rid of him. Then after this, all this stuff happened. The mainstream media demonized the fans, calling them racist, sexist, Russian bots, all that. Like there was so many, like they've gotten and they still use The Last Jedi to this day as something to hang on to. And so the fans hated Kennedy Catholic for all this, and they wanted her replaced. And this movie have for a budget of around $300 million. Solo, a Star Wars story. So this one had a lot of reshoots, some rewrites and stuff. There were some director's changes. This had some production problems, and it had $300 million reported budget. And this is the first Star Wars movie to lose money. Hashtag Solo lost money. And yeah, after this one, people were real, and this released a few months after Last Jedi, so it was affected by that. It probably would have made more if it released in December, like the other movies, because something's I wouldn't say calmed down, but relatively, they probably would have made more money in December because you also had Deadpool 2 and Avengers Infinity War around the same time that took a lot of the potential revenue. Yeah, if a Star Wars movie loses revenue to a Marvel movie, that's a bad sign. I mean, guess what? Star Wars is a bigger IP. So that should have been a sign that Kenny needed to go. Star Wars Resistance. So this was a show that people forget about. It took place during the sequel trilogy era. Season 1, 12 episodes. Season 2, 19 episodes. Like, as far as the sequel trilogy plot points it used, it actually held it a lot better than the movies did. Like, the Hosnian Prime explosion was handled so much better. Low bar set, but it was handled so much better. And basically, it was a waste of a show. It was a waste of time. I I don't think Filoni did. I don't know how much Filoni actually did because he had Mandalorian and Rebels. I think he left this by the wayside. But enough with that. So 40 total episodes, 1 million per episode. This cost around $40 billion total. Galaxy's Edge. This is a park that they built in both Hollywood Studios and Walt Disney World and in Disneyland. It used some story based on a planet called Batu that no one cares about. Instead of making rides based on the movies and shows, like what Harry Potter World does in Universal, they just try to do some forced interactivity. And so each location cost 1 billion. So for total, it was 2 billion. Like a bunch of forced interactivity that honestly I'd say was more annoying than anything. And they could have done so much. Could have done it. Here's a ride they should have done. You could have done a X-wing roller coaster based off the Battle of Yavin, and you could have you know a straightaway with that big run that Luke takes, and then your big drop would be Rise to Proton torpedo drops to blow up the Death Star. That would have been, and you could have some restaurants like a Dexter's Diner, Mos Eisley Cantina. There's so much they could have done with this, but obviously they didn't, and that's on them. Jedi Fallen Order. So this was a game released in 2019. After all the issues EA's had with Star Wars, they released this and did pretty well. Like it's probably their most well-received game for a good story, good gameplay. As far as budget, it's AAA, so it costs around $200 million. Episode 9, Rise of Skywalker. No, so how I mentioned earlier about Kenny being fired, earliest in reality she could have been fired would have been after this movie because it ended the trilogy. No one wants their first movie to be the end of a trilogy, so in reality, they couldn't get rid of her until this was done. So as far as production, they tried to quote quote appease all sides of the fandom, but they never understood the root problem, or they just didn't care. They tried to put a bunch of worthless nostalgia to get some of the old fans in, but they turned Lando into a coward. Then they ripped off Dark Empire, which was already pretty controversial because of bringing back the Emperor, and they ripped off Legacy of the Force, kind of like the other two sequel trilogy movies did with Kylo Ren. And somehow the Emperor returned, and Disney didn't care to explain. They brought Han back somehow, even though he's not a Force user and therefore can't be a Force ghost. And they never explained how that worked. And then Disney, to try to explain some plot holes, tried to use interviews and other forms of media to explain it, instead of using the actual movie itself. And Rey Palpatine, I refuse to call her Rey Skywalker. She was given the Millennium Falcon, the lightsabers of Luke, Leia, and Anakin, and she was given the Skywalker name. So a Palpatine ends up on top. Yeah. And so the budget for this was around $416 million. Now, that's before all the reshoots and all that. Mandalorian seasons 1 and 2. Now, these two seasons were relatively well received, especially with the return of Luke Skywalker and Boba Fett returning, basically acting as Boba Fett, being the hardcore bounty hunter. And Grogu, or the child, or Baby Yoda, as people like to call him, provides some really good merchandising for them. They made a lot of money from that. But with all the stuff that lessons that should have been learned from this show, Disney learned the wrong ones. They try with Grogu. They basically wanted to just have a bunch of little cute characters and get people to buy merchandise and say oh. And then with Luke and Boba Fett, they were like, oh, let's do all these cameos and guest appearances. Let's see, jingling keys. You like this? I remember. Yeah. So seasons 1 and 2 had 8 episodes each, 16 total episodes, 15 million per episode, $240 million budget. Clone Wars season 7. Now, I'm not including season 6 because I think a lot of that was basically done by the time Disney bought it. So I'm not including season 6 in the money. We'll include season 7. And despite all the changes Disney made to the scripts, this season was relatively well received. I mean, the middle arc, the Ahsoka's walkabout, received more criticisms, especially with the Martez sisters. But the overall season was relatively well received, especially Siege of Mandalore. So on average, 1 million per episode, 12 episodes, $12 million budget. Squadrons. This was like a first-person Starfire game, relatively forgettable, AA game. So it was cheaper to make, cheaper to buy. So I would say in AA's, they're cheaper. I estimate maybe like it was maybe at minimum around $2 million budget. Bad Batch season 1. This had some decent audience reception, and I think their views like the ratings were not terrible. Like I think it actually beat Loki in the ratings. It may have, may not. I can't remember. But there was criticism for how Omega was portrayed in this season, and that was the main source of criticism. But this season had 16 episodes, 1 million per episode, $16 million budget. Vision season 1. This was all these others were made by Japanese anime studios, 9 episodes, and it's all standalone. Relatively decent reception. The ratings I think were okay, but everyone's like, "How is a studio that's not Disney beat Disney and Star Wars?" That was a big discussion point. And yeah, I mean, I enjoyed most of those 9 episodes, not all of them, most of them. And now I put budget here because since it's made by foreign studio, how that country's budgets work is different than here, so I have no way to know how much it cost. Book of Boba Fett. So this was like Boba Fett being a mobster, and it was like they were trying to have him be like a the talent card role for their heir to the Empire thing. And this show turned both from the morally great bounty hunter, basically, where he's good or bad, depends on who's paying. They turn him into like a hero, a sympathetic character. And it made the ending of Mando season 2 worthless by having Grogu leave Luke for Din Djarin, and not even in Din Djarin's show. Like, and they didn't do the monster stuff well. They could have, I don't know, maybe hired David Chase, Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, or someone who knew the mobster genre, just to tell them how to do it well. Kind of like how She-Hulk didn't hire anyone to help them deal with courtroom scenes. This had 7 episodes, 15 million per episode, $105 million budget. Obi-Wan Kenobi. So, yeah, this had a lot of real preliminary marketing about Reva that demonized the fans, and basically characters could get stabbed by a lightsaber and live with no immediate care. And broke canon by having Obi-Wan and Vader beat in between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, which never happens. It never happens. And also broke canon by having Leia meet with Obi-Wan, and Vader obviously knew about that, and the fact that she was able to be a senator of Alderaan and not be suspected of being a rebel or release. I mean, she was probably suspected a lot because Bail was very outspoken, but not suspected. Leia wasn't ever suspected enough to where, like, basically the Emperor and Vader be like, we're going after her no matter what. With this show, it'd be like, how do they let Leia be a senator? And with all the issues, this was the final nail in the coffin. Star Wars was dead. Well, Disney Star Wars was dead. A lot of people will look back and say, when the EU ended, was the death of Star Wars. Only put this at 6 episodes, 15 million per episode, so $90 million budget. Now let's go into what all happened after Star Wars died. Andor Season 1. This had mixed to positive reception, but the viewership was very low because it came after Obi-Wan. Everything after Obi-Wan suffered in the ratings. I saw Season 1. I was not a fan. That was pretty boring. I think the Coruscant stuff should have been more like House of Cards, or like House of Dragon, or like the Darth Plagueis novel. Great novel, highly recommend. In order to make it more intriguing, like all the inner workings of Coruscant. And then, no, I didn't care about Andor. I didn't care about Cassian Andor. And so the budget for this season was $250 million, 12 episodes, so it was a little less than $21 million per episode. So around 60% higher than the live action shows before it. Tales of the Jedi, the TV version, not the comic. Comic is great. I didn't watch this show because I was done with Star Wars, but the comic of Tales of Jedi from the 90s is incredible. Highly recommend. Now, as far as show goes, decent reception, but the viewership was very low. 6 episodes, $1 million per episode, so $6 billion budget. Bad Batch seasons 2 and 3. Mixed to positive reception, but low viewership. Omega was still criticized. So you had 16 episodes season 2, 15 episodes season 3, 31 episodes, $1 billion per episode, $31 million budget. Mandalorian season 3. This had negative reception, I think, from both critics and audiences, more so from the audiences. The children watch just looked like a bunch of retards. Din Djarin basically got sidelined in favor of Bo-Katan Kryze, who basically then gave her the dark saber, and she became Mandalore. Was even allowed to take her armor off despite take her helmet off despite joining the Children of the Watch, which was against their rules. You're not supposed to show other people your face. And they've never explained children to watch like the helmet thing. Good way to explain it would have been there's a vow demand. Let's say if the children watch were like a elite guard that had to take a special vow. That would be an interesting explanation. But they made it look like this season made them look like a bunch of idiots. And you had the Jack Black stuff, the Lizzo stuff. Like it's it's like Luke's stop caring with this show after season two. But this season had 8 episodes, 15 million per episode, $120 million budget. Jedi Survivor. This had mixed to positive reception. Like I didn't buy it because it involved the High Republic and Obi-Wan happened. This was a AAA game. Its budget was probably closer to 300 million, but I just generous and guessed 200 million. Young Jedi Adventures. This was like a preschool show. It's pretty forgettable. I don't think a lot of people watched it. This had 25 episodes, 1 million per episode, so around 25 million total. Vision season 2. So this was made by studios from multiple nations instead of just Japan. And so this had mixed reception, low viewership because it came after Obi-Wan. It had 9 episodes. And like with season 1, I don't know how to determine the budget. Ahsoka. So this had mixed to positive reception from the critics and negative reception from the audience. Sabine Wren was made force sensitive despite her never showing any sign of that in Rebels. Like the fact that she's force sensitive apparently makes uh, King Jarrus look like a retard. Because like why didn't he train her then? Like, and to make clear, they're like, oh, if you try hard enough, you can use the force. That's not how the force works. Yes, everyone has a midichlorian count, but there's a certain amount you need in order to actually use it. Now, if they said she's possessed by someone who's using the force through her, that'd be one thing. Or if it's like so there was a Knights of the Republic comic where there was a force sensitive villain who was telling this non-force sensitive character that she was force sensitive and thought she was used, but it turns out it was the villain using the force through this other character, and none of them knew that. It was revealed very late in that series. It was that portion of the Nigel Republic comic series. It's not great. Like once like a once like the once that final battle in Coruscant was done earlier than that, they should have ended it there. Like anyway, besides that, now continuing on with this series. So the New Republic, especially the males and Grand Admiral, were made to look like idiots. Grand Admiral Thrawn looked like an idiot. This had 8 episodes, 15 million per episode, so $120 million budget. Galactic Star Cruiser. So this was like a hotel that was way overpriced. It didn't look like Star Wars. It looks more like dirt cheap Star Trek. Like looked like someone made a really bad Star Trek like convention. It didn't even look even like an attempt at Star Wars. So, and they try to force interactivity. The rooms looked awful. It's more like a barrack than a hotel room. And it got shut down because they didn't make any money. And it cost like around $300 million. Tales of the Empire. This had positive critical reception, but mixed to negative audience reception. So it made Barriss Offee an Inquisitor, and it made Morgan Els. And there was like some story arc involving Morgan Elsbeth, who no one cares about. Like she's not a fan favorite. Either on most of the characters Disney calls fan favorite, but besides the point. This had 6 episodes, 1 million per episode, so $6 million budget. The Acolyte. Yeah, this is a Yeah, this was an interesting one. So yeah, it was High Republic. It was a lot of DEI stuff, a lot of bad writing, and like, man, the whole Renew the Acolyte campaign, and like how viewership was so bad, the audience reception was overwhelmingly negative. The critical reception was mixed to positive, mostly positive. There were very few critics like criticizing it, at least amongst ones that are actually willing to talk about it. And so, $230 million budget, 8 episodes, so it costs a little less than $0.9 million per episode. So it was almost twice as much as most of their live action shows. Yeah. So the power of one really bad show, the power of too much retardation, and the power of many millions of dollars lost. So this was a game that Ubisoft was involved with, had positive critical reception, negative audience reception. You know, a lot of like DEI consultants were involved. Can't remember if it was exactly Sweet Baby Inc. involved, if it was another consultant. But this is a AAA game. Its budget was probably closer to 300 million, but I decided to be generous, kind of like with Jedi Survivor, and say $200 million budget. Skeleton Crew. This was like a forgettable like kid show. It was compared to the Goonies, but it was dumbed down for kids, which is, well, it's pretty dumb because I'm like, there's good kid shows that very quality writing. This ain't it. Like like they use kids as an excuse to make things stupid. I'm like, hey, treat kids with respect and do good writing. That's what I think. Kind of like what you're supposed to do with the more, I guess, adult entertainment or young adult entertainment. So the budget for this show was 136 million and at 8 episodes, so 17 million per episode. So a lot closer towards like the Mandalorian, Ahsoka, Obi-Wan level. So higher than those shows, but it's still closer to that. So significantly cheaper than like the Acolyte and Andor. And here's all the stuff that at the time recording this is upcoming. So you have Andor season 2, which comes out later this month. $395 million budget for season 2, since I heard that the total show cost 645 million and season 1 cost 250, so season 2 is 395 million. And there's 12 episodes of that film, so it's like almost 33 million per episode. So that that that's more than twice the price of like Mandalorian. Then you have the Mandalorian Grogu movie, which is the next upcoming movie that it's basic. I think it is going to release. It's basically guaranteed to release because it's about done or close to done. I think it will flop, especially after season three's ratings. Think of a new Jayor movie, the Ray movie that may or may not release. I think there's a 50-50 chance it will get canceled. Dawn of the Jedi, in name only. The comic version, Dawn of the Jedi, is so much better. And for New Jayor, books are awesome. I've read one of the books, but I I've heard other books are so good. And for Dawn of Jedi, I've read those comics. I really enjoyed those. So New Jayor, Dawn of Jedi, those upcoming movies will be in name only. They ain't gonna be the real ones. Ahsoka season 2, which probably is gonna involve Abeloth, so it's gonna be like some Fate of the Jedi type thing. I'm gonna predict that the Gris are gonna be servants of Abeloth. That's what I'm gonna predict. That's the route I think they're gonna go. Like they're gonna say they're servants of Abeloth from another galaxy. That's what I bet they're gonna go season 2 if they actually release it. I think there's a 50-50 chance Ahsoka season 2 gets it's canceled. Heir to the Empire, the big Dave Filoni movie coming that may or may not have most of the characters actually involved with Heir to the Empire. So Luke's a maybe, Han's a maybe, Leia's a maybe. Lando's a maybe. R2 and 3PO are maybe, I would say, are maybes. Talent card, there's nothing to say about talent, known about talent cards, so he's probably not gonna be in it. They're probably gonna have Boba Fett be that. Mara Jade, nothing's known about Mara Jade. So that one's probably gonna be Din Djarin, Grogu, Ahsoka, Sabine, Ezra, Hera, basically fighting Thrawn, and it's gonna be a very bad movie if it releases. I think there's a chance it gets canceled. It gets canceled. So now Vision season 3, like with 1 and 2, since it's made by foreign studios, I don't know how the budget works for Vision season 3. Tales of the Other World. This was announced a few days ago. It's coming out May 4th of this year, and I believe it'll be 1 million per episode, 6 episodes, so $6 million budget. Now, now there's a reason why I was bringing up money earlier. I want to see whether or not Disney actually made profit on Star Wars. And so, a while back, they announced they've made 12 billion revenue on the franchise. So let's see whether or not they've made profit. So first, we'll go with the total cost of the films. So 447 million plus 265 million plus 300 million plus 300 million plus 416 million equals $1.728 billion. Now for the live action TV shows. So we have 360 million plus 105 million plus 90 million plus 645 million plus 120 million plus 230 million plus 136 million equals $1.686 billion. Now for animated TV shows. So 75 million plus 40 million plus 12 million plus 47 million plus 6 million plus 25 million plus 6 million plus 6 million equals $217 million. Now for video games. So 200 million plus 200 million plus 200 million plus 2 million plus 200 million plus 200 million equals $1.002 billion. Novels. So back when the EU was still going on, there were 9 novels released in a time since Disney owned the company. Then you've had some novelizations since then. There's 8 novelizations. Then you have 23 High Republic books. Then all the books outside that, and like the prequel and original trilogy and sequel eras. So all that gives us a total of 104 books. And a novel costs around $2,000. So they've spent around $208,000 in total on novels. Now for comic book. So before Disney killed the EU, there were 84 comics done for the expanded universe. And we've also had the Star Wars, which was like a non-canon series based off of like old versions of the Star Wars scripts for like the original trilogy. And there were that was an 8 issue series. And then since Disney Star Wars like started, we've had 290 from Marvel and 29 from IDW. That gives us a total of 411 comics under Disney. And a comic costs around $100, so total cost for comics were $41,100. Now for a lot of the miscellaneous stuff. So this is stuff that I couldn't determine expenses for. That would be like Visions, the marketing costs for all their stuff, all the reshoots and rewrites for like their shows and films and stuff. Because a lot of that's not included in production budgets. And then you also have the short stories that were released. You have Forces of Destiny and Galaxy of Adventures, which are like different like short films. I don't know how to determine the cost of a short film. Then you had everything like merchandising costs, mobile games, the DLC for all the video games, such as Battlefront 2 updates, all the maintenance for the parks, cross promotions with other franchises, like what they did with Fortnite to promote Rise of Skywalker. You had all the stuff they've canceled, which is a lot, like Rangers of the New Republic, the Ryan Johnson trilogy, which that's canceled. They're not gonna say it's canceled, but that trilogy's canceled. The Weiss and Benioff trilogy, Taika Waititi's film, Kevin Feige's film, and then all the conventions that they've done, like Star Wars Celebration, Comic Con, and all the other ones. Any inflation that's incurred since they bought Star Wars for all their expenses. They have all the behind the scenes documentary, like all the ones Mandalorian have. There was that Boba Fett one. I can't remember if Ahsoka had one. And all their upcoming films. Like I don't think the budgets for those films. I don't think they've been reported yet. But so there's budget for those films, and then there's also any revenue they've gained since that 12 billion was announced, which is probably not a lot. It's probably a small amount of revenue because there's no movies, so there's no box office. Merch sales aren't what they used to be. Now for the total expenses without miscellaneous. So the 4 billion they spent buying Star Wars plus the 1.728 billion plus 1.686 billion plus 217 million plus 1.002 billion plus 2 billion plus 300 million plus 208,000 plus 41,100 equals 10,933,249,100. Now to calculate profit without miscellaneous. So 12 billion revenue minus 10,933,249,100 in expenses gets you a net amount of 1,066,750,900. So with miscellaneous, that drops significantly. But since I have no way to calculate that, I can't give you a number. So there is a chance that Disney's in the red. There's a chance they've lost money on Star Wars. There's also a chance they've just made small amounts of profit. And this is Star Wars. If you're not making $1 billion in profit, I mean that's a red flag. That would years ago that would have gotten people fired if they were not making $1 billion of profit on Star Wars, on the overall franchise. If it's like one project here and there, that'd be one thing. But on your franchise, you're not making more than a billion. You're not making more than a billion. No, that's a fireable offense. But you get woke, you go broke. And if Hollywood would quit trashing us fans, we would all be happy about it. Now, here's what Disney needs to do to save Star Wars. Now, do I think they'll do any of this? No. Sadly, they won't. They'll double down. But if they ever did decide to save Star Wars, here's what all they need to do. Number one, apologize to the fans. They demonize us, call us bigots, say a bunch of false things about us. They need to apologize. They need to own up to it. They need to apologize for killing the greatest franchise in history. They owe everyone an apology. They need to own up to their mistakes. Then they need to say, I'm sorry. Then they need to get rid of all the writers, producers, directors, and executives who killed Star Wars, which includes Kathleen Kennedy, Dave Filoni, Paulo Hidalgo, Jar Abrams, Ryan Johnson, and Leslie Headland, and everyone else who does not fall in line with plans to save Star Wars. Anyone who doesn't want to save Star Wars, they're gone. Like they're removed from Lucasfilm, and Lucasfilm could find people to replace them. Then they need to decanonize everything except for the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. I mean, Disney Star Wars, that goes without saying. No one's going to complain about that being on now. Clone Wars. Look, I'm a fan of Clone Wars. But I do think it needs to be decanonized because there are a bunch of plot holes, a lot of continuity errors, And if you all remember the holocron system, it was put on a lower level of canon. So you can justify decanonizing it. But uh, but the OT and the PT, those need to stay. Then all the story treatments for George's sequel trilogy, Underworld, all the unaired arcs from Clone Wars, and all the canceled EU projects like Sword of the Jedi, which was a Jaina Solo series, 1313, Battlefront 3, Battlefront 4, anything else, the Unzadi trilogy, then all the stuff with the Jedi Queen stuff with Alana Solo, get all that, procure everything, and consolidate it so that they can plan. All right, then you plan out new continuity with the original trilogy and prequel trilogy serving as the foundation. So we build off of those 6 movies. And for inspiration, you use the Expand Universe, 2008 Clone Wars show and movie, Underworld, George's sequel trilogy, and a few Disney characters and concepts that can be used only if the story works out. If the story can't work out, can't be used. So, for example, the Death Star prison riot from the the real Battlefront 2. You could do a plot point where Cody Rook and Galen Erso start the riot in order to get the Death Star plans off of there, or at least that section of the plans, and to Paulus Mass, and you got Bodhi Rook pilot the Land craft that does escape. That could be something you could do, and for Peridia, the planet from Ahsoka, you could do something where the Dathomirians were from there, because the Rancor are the original inhabitants of Dathomir, and the Qual who used to live there, used to be on Dathomir. There's possibility they're from another galaxy, and you could do a plot point that said the Qual come from the same galaxy as the Dathomirians, and that when the Qual came, and you could say the Qual built the Eye of Sion because they built the Infinity Gates, because the Eye of Sion seems to be like an Infinity Gate that's located in space instead of on a planet. And you could say they went through the gate to get to the main galaxy, and they brought Dathomirians with them, and they all inhabited Dathomir. And why it's called the Eye of Sion, you could say that maybe the founder of the witches, like Aaliyah, was like a former Jedi, excommunicated. You could say she studied ancient Sith lords and found the Eye of Sion and called it the Eye of Sion after the Darth Sion. And do an actual like lore for that, and say that there's some lore you can do for stuff, and then you make some new content to help with continuity errors, like stuff I mentioned, because there are continuity errors that the EU had with the original trilogy, prequel trilogy, and that Clone Wars had with the original trilogy and prequel trilogy, and you make some changes only to fix the errors. So with because the OT and PT, they're at the top, they take priority, and changes to the EU, TCW, Underworld, and all that should be done to make sure they align with the first 6 movies. And while this does being made, the franchise and its fans need to be respected, which is not what Disney did. All right. Then to get people back into Star Wars, because a lot of people checked out, you re-release some of the old content from the George Lucas era. So original trilogy, prequel trilogy, Clone Wars, both the movie and the show, and a lot of the expand universe content, like the 2003 Clone Wars micro series, which is fantastic. I highly recommend. Then a lot of the EU comics, novels, video games. I don't do like variant colors or something, whatever. Market them, and to get people back in the Star Wars and say, hey, read this and hold us accountable when we adapt this. into our new continuity. You know, tell the fans that we want you back, and here's some stuff to show you how much we want you back. And it's a good way to, make some money to help fund the new content. Then, once everything's made, everything you need to make to start releasing stuff, release all the new content and then make money. If you do it right, you make a hell of a lot of profit. Like, Lucasfilm will be swimming in money if they do all this. Like, they'd be like, Scrooge McDuck swimming in a big pool filled with money. You know, they would have gold bars in their eyes like Mr. Krabs, flying off into hyperspace with their chest full of money. I mean, they'll do so well. Star Wars would be back on top. I guarantee it. And this ain't a Charles Barkley guarantee. This is a real guarantee. And that's really it. Do y'all agree with the stuff I've said? Do you disagree? Please leave your comments, in the comment section. Do you have your own ideas how Star Wars can be saved? And do you think even if someone tries to save it, do you think people will come back? I do think some people will come back. There are obviously some people who will just say, screw y'all. I'm going to find something else, regardless if they're just being saved. And it's understandable. But I think if someone tries to save Star Wars, I think people will come back. And all the stuff I said in this video describe how it can be saved. But we all know Disney ain't gonna do it. They're gonna let Star Wars die. And that's on them. We'll find other stuff to watch, and Disney's gonna have to deal with that. So please like, subscribe, share all that, you know, and look forward to the next video.